He had no idea who he was aiming at. If he did, that weapon would never have left its holster. If you believe respect should be earned, not assumed, then like this story and subscribe so more people can witness what real courage looks like. It all began on a night that wasn't supposed to matter. Just a routine recall drill after sunset on the Army National Guard base, tucked behind the quiet pine woods of Fort Dalton, the kind of place where floodlights hummed against cold metal fences and soldiers yawned through exercises they'd rather be done with. I was there because curiosity and timing had pulled me into the wrong place at the wrong second. Though in truth, Staff Sergeant Lena Ortiz was never really in the wrong place. At 28 years old, half the base had already heard whispers about her return. A combat medic with a silver star and scars she never talked about. The kind of soldier who didn't brag about survival, because surviving was the hardest part to speak of. She'd only been back stateside 6 months, volunteering now to help train new medics, teaching them how to apply tourniquets fast enough to keep their hands from shaking, how to keep breathing steady when everyone else's world stops. But tonight, those students weren't around. Tonight, she was just a woman in jeans and a black hoodie, walking along the perimeter to clear her mind while waiting for her ID badge to reactivate, thinking through the old ghosts that still followed her every step. The base was under a temporary lockdown drill, alarms flashing periodically as MPs checked vehicles, and Lena respected every rule. She just didn't expect that one young sergeant would see her come in the dark and mistake it for threat. His name, I would later learn, was Sergeant Keller, a newly minted E5 desperate to prove he was worth the stripes stitched on his sleeve. He'd gotten the call that a civilian-looking figure was spotted near the armory during the drill, and fear poured gasoline over his inexperience. I didn't see him notice her first, didn't hear his radio crackle warnings I wasn't meant to hear. All I heard was him stomp across the gravel, like he was chasing a fleeing enemy instead of walking towards someone who had already given more than he ever had. Lena turned when she heard him shout, slow, controlled, her palms open. She'd spent too many nights in a different desert with real guns pointed at her to flinch at a trembling one. "Show me your ID." Now, Keller barked, his voice high and cracking under the weight of command he wasn't ready to carry. And when Lena calmly explained her badge malfunction, not defensive, just factual, he took that as defiance. I stood a few yards back, frozen between wanting to intervene and knowing that moving might escalate something that was already rising like floodwater around our ankles. The floodlights carved hard shadows across Lena's face, but her expression stayed unreadable. Not scared, not angry, just tired in the way people get when they've lived through worse than this. "Hands where I can see them," Keller demanded, and when she raised them exactly as ordered, even adding, "I'm Staff Sergeant Ortiz. Check the roster for tonight's recall." He didn't check anything. He just grabbed for his M9. The metallic click of his thumb snapping the retention strap loose sent a cold jolt up my spine, because that sound meant he had stopped thinking. He yanked the pistol free, holding it with 2 hands like he practiced in front of a mirror, muzzle shaking just enough to prove he was terrified and hiding behind adrenaline. Lena's posture shifted a fraction, her boots planted, shoulders squared, every fiber of her alert, but still so unbelievably calm. "Sergeant," she said, voice level, rational, guiding. "I'm complying. You don't need to." "On the ground," he screamed, drowning the logic she offered with blind certainty. She didn't drop. She didn't flinch. She just raised her chin half an inch. A silent refusal to surrender dignity she had earned with firefights and bodies she'd carried through dust and artillery. Keller interpreted that tiny act of courage as resistance. "You move again, I shoot." His voice cracked so loudly it echoed off the concrete wall behind her. For a suspended second, the world shrank to the straight line between the barrel of his weapon and the unwavering stillness of her gaze. I remember thinking, she could die right here in the country she fought for. The first MP arrived too late. He saw the gun drawn, Lena's hands up, and his instincts pulled his own weapon before his brain caught up. Now there were 2 guns aimed at her. 2 soldiers convinced the calmest person on this base was a threat. Lena inhaled slowly, that invisible switch flipping inside her, and she spoke with the softness of someone negotiating their own heartbeat. "Look at my sleeve," she told them, and when the fluorescent glare caught the edge of her tattoo, the medic insignia coiled around coordinates inked into her skin. A warning wrapped inside truth. It didn't matter. Keller didn't look. Keller didn't want truth. He wanted control. He stepped forward one reckless stride, lowering the barrel toward her center mass. A rookie mistake that left his firing wrist exposed, an angle she had drilled 1,000 times in real combat with enemies who didn't freeze. That was when the night stopped being a standoff and became history. Lena moved. I barely saw it. A sweep of her arm, a pivot of her hips, a flash of steel under the floodlights. And suddenly Sergeant Keller was the one gaping in shock as the M9 left his hands and snapped into hers like it belonged there. In a single, seamless motion, she dropped the magazine, racked the slide to eject the chambered round, locked the slide back and pivoted away, clearing the weapon faster than he had ever drawn it. 30 seconds. That was all it took for the power in that moment to flip on its axis, for the soldier pointing a gun to become the man with empty hands and a future falling apart in slow motion. The MPs froze. Keller stammered. She stood there unarmed again, the pistol disabled at her feet. And in the rising silence, I understood the truth that he refused to see. She didn't need a uniform to be the most dangerous and most honorable warrior here. Chaos has a strange way of slowing down just enough for everyone to realize how wrong they are. And the second the weapon clattered harmlessly onto the pavement, the MPs snapped out of their shock like someone had slammed a defibrillator into the night air. They surged toward Lena, shouting overlapping commands that made no sense anymore. Down. Hands out. Don't move. And even though she had just neutralized a direct threat without injury to anyone, she didn't fight them. Her discipline was rooted too deep for that. She let herself be shoved to the ground, gravel biting into her cheek as rough hands cinched cuffs around her wrists, her breathing still steady, her gaze unfazed and fixed ahead as if she'd memorized the stars above the base from every night she'd refused to relive the Middle East. Sergeant Keller scrambled backward, humiliation blooming red across his face as he clutched his empty holster like a man stripped bare in front of his own fears. The MPs lifted Lena roughly, pushing her toward the patrol car, and that's when the senior MP, Staff Sergeant Dalton, stopped, eyes narrowing down at the disassembled M9 on the ground. "Who cleared this?" he muttered, lifting the weapon and turning it, his thumb brushing the locked slide. Keller grabbed the chance to reclaim authority, pointing at Lena like she was a demon caught mid-spell. "She stole my firearm." She tried to, but Dalton cut him off sharply. "Stole it. Or took it from you because you were about to misuse deadly force." His voice carried the cold weight of someone who had seen actual combat, someone who could spot panic masquerading as command. He glanced back at Lena, and though she was cuffed and silent, there was a flicker of recognition in his stare, the kind that said, "I know what real training looks like, and you're wearing it like war paint." He stepped closer, pushing up the edge of her sleeve, revealing the tattoo Keller had refused to acknowledge. The medical caduceus entwined around a set of GPS coordinates, inked permanently over skin that had known more pain than everyone standing here combined. "Where's this?" Dalton asked quietly, almost respectfully. Lena hesitated only a breath before answering. "Lion's Gate," she said, the name dropping between them like a grenade no one wanted to pick up. Dalton's face drained of color, because those coordinates weren't random. They belonged to the site of one of the most brutal ambushes in Syria 3 years ago, a battle where 11 soldiers survived against impossible odds thanks to a single medic who refused to retreat. Word traveled fast among soldiers who knew what sacrifice looked like, and Dalton stepped back as if the gravity of who stood before him had just grown too large for the space between them. "Check the roster," he barked to a private holding a tablet, and within seconds the young man's eyes widened like he'd seen a ghost walking under floodlight. "Sir?" She's Staff Sergeant Ortiz. Silver Star. Medal for Valor. Multiple combat commendations. Transferred to the reserves last quarter. Every nearby soldier froze. Even Keller, whose face now twisted from fake bravado into dawning horror. Dalton spun, fury sharpening his voice. "Why the hell is she in cuffs?" The MPs scrambled to unlock her restraints, muttering apologies, but Lena didn't rub her wrists or look at them. She just stood still, shoulders squared, pride intact, as if humiliation couldn't find purchase on someone who already knew the worst the world could do. A black SUV rolled into the lot with a screech of urgency, and the base commander, Colonel Hayes, a man known for rarely showing emotion, stepped out, eyes scanning until they found Lena. His expression broke protocol entirely. Relief, respect, even guilt. And he stepped closer before anyone could salute. Ortiz, he breathed out like her existence alone put something right in the world. Welcome home. Then his tone whipped into steel as he turned on. Keller, the salute he'd given Lena still practically echoing. You drew a weapon on a decorated combat medic? On a fellow NCO? During a training scenario with zero verified threat. Keller stumbled over excuses, his voice unraveling. Sir, she wasn't in uniform. She didn't identify. I felt. You felt scared. Hayes snapped, his accusation piercing every other sound. And you let your fear dictate deadly force. That is not leadership. He gestured to the MPs. Cuff him. The click of metal closing around Keller's wrists was as poetic as justice ever gets. Fast, cold, and witnessed by every soldier who'd watched him act like a bully seconds earlier. They marched him toward the same patrol car they'd nearly shoved Lena into, and the humiliation was complete. His head bowed, shoulders shaking, reputation shattered under the weight of his own insecurity. Hayes then turned back to Lena with a softness that only those who understood the cost of silence could offer. You didn't have to neutralize him without harm, he said quietly. A lesser soldier would have fired. Lena looked down at her hands, the same hands that had held pressure on bullet wounds, trembling hearts, dying brothers, and she replied with nothing more than a nod. Because the truth required no applause. She had never once gone into a fight to take a life, only to save them. Hayes extended his hand. Walk with me, he told her, and as the MP stood aside to let them pass, you could almost feel the shift ripple outward, rumors turning to awe, because every soldier in that moment remembered the story they'd heard years ago about the lone medic who stayed behind enemy lines, holding the line until air support arrived, patching the wounded while firing warning shots into darkness to keep the enemy at bay. They realized the legend wasn't just real. She was standing right in front of them, quieter and stronger than any metal could ever explain. Soldiers straightened instinctively when she walked by, not for rank, not for orders, but for respect that finally found its rightful target. The commander led Lena toward the headquarters building, his steps careful, almost reverent, while the base seemed to inhale collectively, watching, learning, recalibrating what they thought they knew about who deserved fear and who deserved respect. Inside the main briefing room, the fluorescent lights buzzed softly as every soldier from the recall drill was ordered to assemble, Keller included, wrists still cuffed, shame radiating from him like heat. Lena stood at the front not as a detainee or a suspect, but as a soldier who had already earned the right to be listened to. Hayes insisted she remain beside him, not behind. Some of you think authority is loud, the colonel said, voice booming across the space. Some think weapons make you powerful. But real power is knowing when not to use one. He stepped aside, giving Lena the floor, and though she hadn't asked to speak nor wanted the spotlight, she faced the room with the same composure she had held under fire. She didn't recount her accolades or flash the scars hidden beneath her clothes. She didn't humiliate Keller further, though his flushed skin and trembling shoulders showed punishment was already etched deep. Instead, she spoke about the things soldiers try hardest to forget. How the line between ally and threat is thin, fragile, and dangerous when judgment is clouded by ego. How she had once been a young private terrified of messing up, and how the leaders she respected weren't the ones who barked the loudest, but the ones who listened first. If you forget the person in front of you and only see the problem, she said, her words slow and steady, you will create enemies where there are none, and you'll lose more than you know. For a moment, you could hear nothing but the low hum of the building. No shifting boots, no nervous coughs, just silence vibrating with understanding. Hayes placed a hand behind her shoulder, guiding her back as he finished what she started. Keller's disciplinary action would be swift, mandatory retraining, and a permanent note in his record. But even that felt secondary to the lesson stamped into every watching heart. Authority misused is a weapon pointed in the wrong direction. After dismissing formation, Hayes escorted Lena outside where the night had grown quieter, stars peeking through the thinning clouds. A small group of soldiers approached, younger medics who recognized her now not by rumor, but by presence. One of them, a trembling private whose eyes shone with the kind of admiration that comes from knowing someone truly heroic, lifted a challenge coin from his pocket. "Ma'am," he said, voice cracking with awe instead of fear. "My sergeant told me a story once, about a medic who stayed behind when the convoy was ambushed, who kept the wounded alive even when she was surrounded. He said she'd never brag about it, but that she'd never let anyone down either." Lena accepted the coin quietly, turning it in her palm, engraved with a dust-covered emblem she once carried through war. She didn't cry. She didn't need to. Her throat tightened for just a breath before she tucked the coin away, nodding with the comfort of someone who finally realized her story still meant something to the people she protected. The soldiers around her squared their shoulders a little more, as though proximity to her strength made them stronger too. As Keller was driven away in the back of the patrol car, his eyes avoided everyone, but especially her, not because she scared him, but because he now understood how small his view of the world had been. The gun he once waved like authority meant nothing next to the courage she carried in silence. Before she left, Hayes called after her, "Ortiz, you ever consider active duty again?" She smirked just enough to show she heard the seriousness beneath his casual tone. "One battle at a time, sir," she replied. She walked across the base as though reclaiming ground she'd never really lost, her boots scuffing against familiar pavement, floodlights casting a soft glow that followed her instead of pinning her down. And I realized then that the real story wasn't about a sergeant who pointed a weapon at the wrong person. It was about a woman who proved she didn't need a weapon at all to command respect. She was a medic, a lifesaver, a soldier who stepped toward danger so others could walk away from it. She didn't need applause, rank, or recognition. Her strength didn't shout, it stood, it healed, it endured. And that night, every person on that base learned one unforgettable truth. Some heroes don't ask to be seen. But once they are, you never look at courage the same way again.